Hello and welcome everyone to the CyVerse webinar series. I'm Tina Lee, CyVerse's User Engagement Officer, and today's webinar is a technology preview of a new application programming interface, or API, called DataWatch. DataWatch will enable you to receive automated notifications of pre-specified data events or changes in your data store. And our presenter is my CyVerse colleague, Sean Davey of our Cloud Native Services team. For those of you who are new to CyVerse, we are a cyber infrastructure project funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation. And today's free webinar is part of a series that helps fulfill a key part of our mission, which is to train scientists on how to use CyVerse computational resources. A quick bit of housekeeping before we start the webinar. Sean's presentation today is approximately 30 minutes. Please mute your audio and do open the chat window. Type any questions you have there for Sean or Edwin Skidmore, and we'll answer them after the presentation. We are video recording, and that and other materials will be posted on our website webinars page later today for you to review at any time. In addition to this webinar series, CyVerse offers focused training workshops and learning materials that are available online. Please visit our website learning pages to see what we've got for you there. We're also happy to announce that we've launched the Discovery Environment 2.0. It's the same great workspace, but with a brand new interface and a lot more functionality for doing your science. So please check it out. And now I'm pleased to introduce Sean. Sean Davey earned his master's in computer science from the University of Arizona. He has developed software for proteomics and genomics at the U of A for biomedical and plant sciences projects. He's developed and continues to work on several ag-based genomics projects here at the U of Arizona. And Sean joined the CyVerse team last year and now works to improve our backend technologies with our Cloud Native Services team, which is led by Edwin Skidmore, who was also on the call today. So welcome, Sean and Edwin.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to share my screen and present my slides. All right, thank you for joining me today for an introduction to DataWatch. DataWatch is a new service that CyVerse is providing. I like to think of it as a link in the chain for science analysis. I do want to stress today that this is a technology preview, which means that while we are going to be launching this software for anyone who's interested, there are more features that will be coming in the future, and there may be some occasional bugs and things that are discovered in the early days. Okay, let's begin. So this diagram represents something you're probably very familiar with, a cycle of doing science analysis or engineering analysis, a cycle that begins with building some sort of pipeline or workflow, testing it, deploying it, analyzing it, and then either there might be an inner cycle represented by the green circle where you take the results of your analysis and then make decisions on how to tweak the next round of analysis. And that is the part that we're going to be focusing on today. So this is kind of a zoom in on that green circle. And you can see that, and if you're familiar with CyVerse, a lot of the data is stored on the data store, and you can do a lot of analysis already in the discovery environment and other areas. DataWatch is a new service which listens to file events on the data store. And it can be configured to send notifications to your services based on those file events. So DataWatch is what we're introducing today. This agent box represents a piece that you would need to provide, or might be something that already exists. For instance, you may have heard of Microsoft Power Automation or other workflow organizing software. So the basic idea is a file event happens on the data store. DataWatch listens to that event and then can create notifications to agent services that can trigger new workflows. and here's kind of the same information in text. DataWatch is a link in between data events and triggers for your analysis. The kind of events that can happen that we currently are listening to are new files being created, files being deleted, files being moved, and files being modified. So basically, to use DataWatch, you're going to configure what are called listeners. And listeners contain information about what directories and or files that you're interested in listening to. How often do you want notifications to be sent? So for instance, if you have an analysis that produces a ton of file changes, you probably don't want to get a notification for every one of them. So DataWatch can bundle those together for you and just notify you on whatever time period that you're interested in. And then the kinds of triggers that DataWatch can send or the notification method is either by email or by webhook. And we'll be adding new methods in the future. This is just a kind of simplified overview of the architecture of DataWatch. This isn't important information for you to know to understand how it works, but it just kind of shows some of the technologies involved. Over on the left, you see the data store, which is Irod's. The RabbitMQ is what we're using to do the actual sending out of those events, and that's what DataWatch listens to. The API is how you interact with DataWatch. That's where you would configure your listeners, and that's all done through an API. And Keycloak is the authentication method we use. So if you already have a CyVerse account, it's very straightforward. You have the same username and password. And then on the other side, there are two current ways of sending notifications, either by email or by pinging a web server, and you have control over what kind of ping that is, different types of HTTP methods. Here's just an example of a typical listener. They have a type, which is currently either email or webhook. Notify interval is optional, but that was what I was talking about if you wanted to control how often you get notifications. So you can bundle them up based on how often you want to get them. The source ID right now is limited to CyVerse. That's our first initial offering. But DataWatch is built to be extensible. So in the future, we hope to add different possible data sources for data events. And I'll talk about that more later in the talk. And then there's one or more paths that are involved. And these are directories or files that you're interested in. And you can have multiple ones for each listener. And you can set up as many listeners as you like. So you might have different situations where you're paying attention to different analyses and want to trigger different events based on them. Here's an example notification that could be sent to your agent software. It's a very simple one. It says basically these two files were created. So then you can, your software can decide what to do with that information. All right, so I'm going to give you now a real world example. This is a potential use for DataWatch with a group called Fido Oracle here at the University of Arizona. And then as you can read here, it says a scalable distributed workflow manager for analyzing high throughput phenotyping data. So Fido Oracle uses the gantry system to do automated scanning of agricultural experiments. So these are fields up in north of Tucson, up by Phoenix closer. And you can see there's a robot with a large box that has different scanners that are run daily for these experiments. So here's an underview of that same box showing you all the sensors. And you can see that they have at least 5 different kinds of sensors. I think they may have more than that now. But this is a very huge project. So you can see that the data that's generated by this can be up to 10 terabytes a day. It's typically about 1.5 terabytes. So all of this information is currently automatically getting stored on the data store. So here's the workflow for the Fido Oracle project. The data is collected by the robot. It gets sent to a cache server. That is automatically bundled up and sent and stored over on the CyVerse data store. And then ultimately, they have a lot of processing that they do on the HPC or high performance computing system that we have here at the U of A. But you can see this step right here is manual. A human has to coordinate all of that. So the idea is that DataWatch could be used to automate that step. DataWatch could be listening to events for the FIDO Oracle data and trigger an agent that would then launch analysis processes on the HPC automatically. So this is kind of a demo that I've created to show you basically if you're going to use DataWatch, how you would use it. DataWatch is a service that has a full API, but I'm going to be showing you a demo using the CLI or command line interface. And it offers the exact same functionality as the API, just is a little easier to use because it handles managing the key cloak token for you. Okay, so this is a terminal. And here is a typical command that you might use to create a listener on DataWatch. So you call DW is just the name of the CLI. You tell it to create a listener. You tell it what kind of listener you want. In this case, it's a webhook. You tell it the source ID, which is CyVerse. You tell it the URL that you want DataWatch to ping when the event happens. And in this case, it's you might have set up this trigger.php file on your server that's going to receive that. The method for this is going to be post. We also support get or headers or whatever kind of HTTP things you need to set for your ping. And then this is the path that you're interested in. And you can set up multiple paths, but I only put one in this example. And so when you run the CLI command, it's going to actually turn around and call the API for you. And then it's going to return the results. And the API is basically just going to tell you, okay, I created this listener. I gave it an ID. Here's all the data that you configured your listener with. So just to let you know that that's going. And then, so now you've got your listeners configured and they're out there listening. And so what we want to do is have a data event that would trigger something for your FIDO Oracle agent. So this, I'm going to do this by hand using a terminal, but you could imagine this is done automatically by the scanner depositing data onto the data, the Irod's server. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into using these I commands. If you're familiar with Irods, this is a way for humans to manipulate data on the data serve. I'm just going to go into the FIDO Oracle directory, and I'm going to put the data directly, and I'm just going to verify that it's there, and that's it. So as soon as that event happened, then DataWatch would trigger the FIDO Oracle agent using, and this is an example of what a notification might look like. It says, oh, look, there's a file was created, and this was the file. So just show this slide again, that that demo represented these new steps, having DataWatch listen for the events, and then send a notification to the agent, which could then trigger the processing on the HPC. And here's just a graphical representation of what that processing might look like. Raw images, the FIDO Oracle software on the HPC has been notified, okay, here are some raw images, and then they have a whole pipeline of different software that they've written or are using to do lots of different calculations, and they do actually lots of different fancy things that they have to because of the nature of the data. All right. And that's pretty much it. It's a fairly simple link, but it's an important one that can hopefully lead to automating workflows for everybody. Here's some of the future work that we have in mind for DataWatch. In addition to the API and the CLI, we're going to be adding a web UI so that you can just go to datawatch.CyVerse.org and create your listeners and manage them there in an easy to use way. We're going to be adding other different types of notifications. One example might be if you have a message queue that takes cloud events, then we could send notifications to that. We could be adding new data sources, including local file systems or S3 or any, pretty much any kind of place where you have files and being stored. And depending on how people use it, we're going to be adding services like, instead of sending every notification, sending something like a summary notification, saying, you had 100 files created, and you don't necessarily need to know all of their names, but you just need to know that they were created or something like that. And then we also hope to integrate DataWatch with other CyVerse services, including Terrain, which is the discovery environment API, and there's lots of projects already who are lining up to start using DataWatch at the University of Arizona. So we expect a lot of that to happen. And here's the final slide. This is the resources if you're interested in finding out more information about DataWatch. It's currently hosted open on GitLab at the CyVerse repository. It's completely open source. There's information there on if you want to install and set up your own DataWatch service, but for initially, we're going to have people use CyVerse's hosting of DataWatch because that's configured to use the RabbitMQ event notifications from the data store. But if you wanted to use it for some other system, you could set it up yourself. There's information for using the CLI and the API, and including this last link. Is if you're familiar with OpenAPI, this is a typical Swagger presentation of the API. And then finally, just like to repeat that this is a technology preview. So we expect DataWatch to grow in functionality in the future, and also are aware that there might be some limitations at the beginning. And that is the end of my presentation. So I haven't taken a look at the chat, but we'll see if there's any questions.
Thanks, Sean. There are some, and we are lucky enough to have some other folks from CyVerse here to weigh in as well. So I'm just going to let you all discuss the questions. You can see it right there. It starts off with Nate Miller's question about whether Irod's server can be a listener. So I'll just unmute yourselves and chat away.
Okay. So the first question is from Nate is, can the Irod server be a listener? And so currently you would need to stand up. So there are a few ways to do this, and these would all have to be tested, of course, because we haven't actually done that scenario. But the short answer is that you could stand up a REST service. There's a couple ways you can even do that for Irod's. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tony. I'm referring to Tony Edgen, who's also on the CyVerse team. But there's at least an Irod's REST service that Renzi provides. So that's one possibility. And then another is that, and Tony also answered this in chat, that there's a possibility of using the web dev service to create a file or deposit a file. So that's another option. We would have to test that as well. And then lastly, you could also use a third-party service like Zapier or IFFT to also facilitate that if you didn't want to stand up your own REST service.
I'm just wondering how hard it would be to test, posting back to Irods, just like a simple test. I know I've hit it up before from not using the I commands and done posts to Irod server. So maybe just having you post back to yourself, if we had some example code for that, would be great.
Well, we could test that out and see and kind of figure out what works. And we could try doing the web dev as well. So what you probably don't want to do, of course, is kind of set up a loop. So you probably don't want to post to the place you're monitoring, which causes the repost.
I will not do that to you.
But yeah, so we could try that out.
And then how many listener events or listeners are we limited to? Like, if I wanted to set up 1 million, is that okay? Am I limited to like thousands, hundreds? What's the scalability of this?
So it should scale well. So what we do is we leverage queuing mechanisms where things don't go out, both at the at the individual notification level as well as on the entire system. So certainly as a technology preview, those are going to be the things that we're going to be looking at, and obviously feedback from folks that are interested in trying out the technology preview would be greatly appreciated. And if anything, to understand what your use cases are. But we feel it should scale well, but I anticipate because it's a technology preview, there will probably be hiccups. So, but right now, Sean, can you share like what are the current limits within the system for other people's
Sure.
curiosity?
So there are no limits programmed in at the moment. I did want to mention that if you have a ton of files that you're interested in that might be somewhere in a directory tree, you could set up a listener for a sort of a root directory that would catch all of them. I'm not familiar with everybody's work, so I don't know what cases might involve having a whole ton of listeners, but we're not anticipating any problems. I mean, these are if you remember the simple description of a listener I gave you, it's not a lot of data. So I think we have capacity for tons of them.
Thank you.
Sean, I think the bigger thing to note is when you're monitoring something and you get many small files, each of them are triggering these separate events. You also have the ability to batch them together, right? So if you are bringing in, let's say, 5,000 files as a stream of many small files, 5,000 of them, you're not wanting to hit your system 5,000 times on the other end because you're going to do a denial of service. That's when you batch some of this. So a lot of this is designing an optimal workflow, and we're happy to chat with you guys on it. But you don't want to do 1:1, especially when you're doing high throughput work. As Sean suggested, defining a directory that is the drop off for your data, monitoring something in it, and then acting upon it, but also acting not per file, but like a collection of file or a grouping of files.
Yeah, and so that's built in inherently with DataWatch, is that it'll bundle it based on some period of time, and then send you a list of those events, so that you're not getting those individually. And so there's a system level duration, and then you can also configure a duration of like how often you want to get these notification events, but you can control it so that if you wanted it greater than what we do by the system.
Yeah, and also we'll be adding that a sort of summary notification. So if you are getting 5,000 files created, you might just want a notification that says 5,000 files were created and not list all 5,000 of them. So.
And then if you do get the summary notification, you'll have a link to be able to get what those 5,000 events would have been. Let's see, going down to questions. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so from Irod, let's see. Does DataWatch just let me know the file changes, such as everyday files created by Fido Oracle Robot? How does it in turn affect my productivity? So in terms of the first question, yes, so it'll alert you for any file changes, as in file modification events, new files created, or file deletes. Also file moves. So those are the events. I'm not exactly sure how it will affect your productivity. So I guess this would be so an alternative way could be if you wanted to create a cron job. So this would save you time of setting up some external service or configuring an external service to monitor for file changes. So it's a convenient way of doing it. So maybe in that sense, that could help with the productivity, if that's what you mean.
I just wanted to say something about the first question too. I didn't mention this in the talk, but I'm planning on adding basically a filter feature, so you can say, I'm actually only interested in file creation events. I don't want to care about deletions or modifications or anything like that. So you'll have control over which events you get. And obviously you only get events for the files that you specify. So you should only be getting what you want.
There was also a question, but is DataWatch now live? Can they go there and start to use it?
Yes, it is It is live. The way to access it will be through the user portal. It'll be listed as one of the available services. We'll ask you to, when you request access, we'll ask you to fill out some information about your use case, but then, and you can actually go to it now. It will report a 404, or is there, I forget if there's a, but if you go to https datawatch.cyvers.org, it should be there. Take a look at it. Yeah. So what you'll get is a simple web page that says it's a REST interface and it's a CLI. We'll be creating a UI for this site shortly, and then there's a link to our Git repo that also provides additional information about how to access the REST API and how to build the CLI if you'd like. But the user portal service request will be created shortly. Okay, so the next question, I'd like to upload data files from an external source on a periodic basis, weekly, monthly, and then trigger calculations on the new data. How could I do that? So DataWatch will provide the ability to get notifications. So in this case, you would most likely want to get a notification to a service that can receive these the URL notification, or it's called a webhook, and then that service that receives it can then invoke a workflow of some sort. So one option is, depending on the nature of the calculations, it could be perhaps uploading the data to Google Sheets and then processing that data. It could be to Microsoft Automate. It could be some other tool that can, or in the case, maybe it launches an HPC workflow. Very shortly, we'll have it connected with Terrain, which is the Discovery Environment API. So you can then launch your containerized analyses directly on that data. So there's different options for that. So.
And maybe if I can clarify, my question is, the real problem for me is, how do I get the data files onto the Irod system and do that in an automatic fashion, like a cron job, that once a week on a particular time, I want to upload those files and then trigger calculation on that. So the upload step, that isn't clear to me if that can be automated like a cron job.
I see. Yes, so that would be external to DataWatch. So, but you could use a cron job to upload the data periodically. Yes.
But is that possible to run the cron job on the CyVerse system? I have no idea how I would do that.
So you would probably run a cron job on your server where the files are, and then the cron job would run a script that would use I commands, probably, including IPut, to move those files every night or whatever to Irod's server.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, the files, I don't host the files. There's an external database, and I want to basically automatically upload the data once a week and spawn a calculation on that.
Ah, I
That's
see.
kind of my use case.
Is this database in the cloud? At another cloud?
I mean, that's a publicly available database like Protein Data Bank and some COVID databases that we are looking at.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so there are different options. If it's there are some services that you can use that are provided through cloud providers that can set up cron jobs, and we can certainly work with you to do that. But we don't have anything like out of the box that can.
Okay. Yeah,
set
maybe
up.
I'll talk to you guys offline about that.
Yeah, and Peter, the question might be, whatever you're monitoring, is that changing and then that's triggering your workflow, or it's very temporal, like every Tuesday at
Yes,
X
it's
time?
right. It's temporal. We have an exact time when we could trigger that upload of new files, and that would then trigger new calculations on top of that.
Okay. Yeah, I can talk to you offline, but a lot of the new Office 365 that universities and others have, so like things like Microsoft Flow has built-in tasks. You can say every time run this task, and it can call a webhook, and which can then trigger something else.
Oh yeah.
So we can show you some of the ways. If
Okay, right.
he has that license, you can then just write that there. So
Okay.
drop me a note, and we can show you how.
Okay, that'd be great. Thanks.
All right, are there any other questions for our team here today? If not, thank you, Edwin and Sean, very much for this great tech preview, and thanks to our audience for great questions. And hopefully you all will be on there trying it shortly. I did want to announce that in 2 weeks, April 16th, our next webinar will be on MLflow, a platform agnostic machine learning lifecycle manager that enables seamless teamwork where each member's individual progress can be tracked and reproduced. So until the 16th, stay healthy, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Thanks, everyone.